Hi everyone, I thought I'd do an update for my channel. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of games I've been playing recently and show some of the new artwork that I've been doing, just talk about that. In terms of the games, I've just finished, I did a review of Stalingrad 42 recently, just played through the main campaign. I love the game series, love this one too. If you're interested in that game, you should check it out. Really great, quite detailed, quite in-depth game. That I enjoy these particular types of games. This one's great. The other game I've been playing a lot, also from GMT, as it happens, is Wing Leader. This is the second edition, and I did a review of this as well. This is a fairly detailed game. I did read a review online where people compared it to ASL, but with planes. It is detailed. It is still very accessible though, I think, and that's partly because the rulebook's great and it sort of takes you through the game. I enjoy it so much so that I picked up the first expansion. That's the rulebook from the first expansion, which has has a main campaign and a mini campaign, both of which are brilliant. Once I'm just playing through the Malta campaign, which is sort of the mini campaign. Once I've done that and played a couple of the other scenarios that I haven't played yet, I'll do a review of that as well. But I love Wing Leader. I've been playing it most evenings now for the last few weeks, so really enjoying that game. And in terms of the artwork, let's have a look. So this is the cover that I've done for American Tank Ace. The design is from Gregory M. Smith, and it's published by Compass Games. I've been working with Gregory and John Krantz from Compass. John showed the cover at the recent Town Hall broadcast that he does over YouTube. So I just thought I'd show this, talk about it for a second. This is actually the mock-up of the cover. So I took the artwork that I did and sort of comped it in just to give an indication of what the final cover would look like. And as you can see, it features an Easy 8 Sherman. The game is really focused on the Sherman tank. There is also a Pershing in the game as well, but mostly it's Shermans, and there's a whole bunch of different Sherman variants that you can play in this game. And talking to Greg about which tank we would like to put on the cover, we kind of both agreed that this piece could work really well. So we'll have a look at the actual artwork itself. So this is the cover as a JPEG, and I've got it in my software that I paint and draw in. And as you can see, zoom in a little bit actually. It gave me opportunity, I think, with this particular tank to revisit the tank and also put it in situ. So to present a cover that is, full colour, edge to edge painting. So it took me a little while to work out a composition, because this actual tank I had drawn previously, but on a pure white background, which enables me to focus actually on the actual piece itself. But putting it into context of the environment was a lot of fun, and it's taken a little while to get it right. And it's, broadly speaking, this is probably the size that I would paint at, and I can use that brush. I normally sort of draw paint at with this sort of size brush, just to indicate that, for example. And as you can imagine, it takes a little while. I think one of the interesting things with the Sherman tank is that when you look at historical photos, the amount of stuff, I'll call it stuff, that the crew would put on the tank, so stowage and crates and spare wheels, and it kind of gives the tank, I think, a more human feel, because it's indicative of the fact that the tank has a crew, which is quite interesting. And I thought that fitted with Gregory's game really well, because in that game you have a crew within the tank. A lot of fun. The other interesting thing with this tank is that obviously it's made famous from the film Fury. A few years ago now, I went to the Tank Museum here in the UK, down in Bovington, a famous tank museum, and this particular tank was, the tank from Fury was actually at the museum. and it gave me an opportunity to have a good look at it. Basically, I would say it felt like a tank that had been deliberately dressed for a movie, whereas I feel like I've tried to go for a more authentic looking tank that's personalised for use. I think, you know what I mean. So all that sort of stowage. But yeah, took quite a bit of time, and as you can see, when you're painting for a cover, you paint a little bit more than that's needed, so that the bottom here actually doesn't appear on the cover, and the same with the sky, so that you can position it correctly with. Oh, there we go. You can position it correctly within the actual sort of format of the cover from the publisher. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I think this was version 4. This is called 4. So I mean, every time I do a new cover, I sort of rename it into a different version. So it took a little while to get the composition right, to get that plume of smoke. So there's a little bit of narrative in the cover, I think, that I've tried to go for. So you get an indication that this tank has been taking part in action, which again is reflective, I think, of the game that Gregory's designing. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. So next up, this is actually one of the pieces of art of the from the game for the tank mat. So these are the mats you're going to be using to play through the game, and you'll be able to see the different tanks and use these when you play through the game. This is an M4A1, and one of the interesting things about the Sherman tank is how many different variants there were. So different turret patterns, different chassis patterns, suspension types, tracks, etc., as well as just the difference between the 75mm and 76mm guns. This is a 75mm gun. 76mm gun would be much longer, and sometimes they had a muzzle on the end, a break on the end. Yeah, it's a fascinating subject matter, and it's one of the things I like about creating historic art or art of historic subjects, is actually delving into the history, and it can become quite absorbing, but a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that very much. To give you some indication, again, this is probably the sort of scale that I'd be painting, and constantly zooming in and out to make sure, and you can see if I just sample from that's the size of brush, something around that sort of size, which when you zoom right out, looks like that. So this is the Pershing piece for the same game, and fundamentally a very different shaped vehicle than the Sherman, but I was able to again sort of use some of the same sort of colour palette that I'd learned from doing Shermans and apply it to the Pershing. A little bit different. A lot of grills on the back, as you can see. It's an interesting subject because the actual turret's quite forward, I would say, compared to, and it's a very long barrel gun as well, compared to some of the World War II tanks that I've done. So yeah, but that will give you, and like I said, the game's focus really is on the Sherman, but it does have you are able to use one of these Pershings, which is a very sort of late war tank. Yeah. This it's always interesting looking back at your art. You kind of go, "Oh, I'm just gonna tweak this bit now." I'm just gonna change that. So I've got to try and stop myself from doing that as I'm recording this video. So next thing I thought I'd show is actually again back to the Sherman, but this is from a side perspective, and this is actually a 76mm gun version. So it's got a much longer gun barrel than the 75mm, and when I'm drawing a lot of different things, I like to immerse myself in the work, and often will draw the same subject matter from a few different angles to help understand the palette that I want to create and understand the lighting that I want to create within the paint, and that's within the paint palette. And I have a lot of fun playing with different palettes, and creating different lighting through that palette on my work. And again, I've drawn the Sherman now, a couple of dozen. I think I've probably done like 30 pieces, I think, on the Sherman. So I'm very familiar with the how the form of the tank, and again, been lucky enough to see a couple in real life. Again, down at the Tank Museum and the different tank show that they have down there. So it's one of my favourite tanks. I'm quite happy to say that, and I've drawn it a lot of times. So yeah, really enjoy this particular subject matter. And again, just to sort of be painting something around this sort of size, and again, just trying different palettes, and through the software, what I'm able to do, just to quickly demonstrate, is that if I sample that colour there, I can lighten it so that I can create a lighter sort of shade, and I'm probably drawing at that sort of angle to get the strokes right. So you can, once you've got your basic palette, you can have fun with within the colour wheel, and do a lot of palette work. So yeah. So next up, this is a Jagdpanzer. Yes, a Jagdpanzer 4, and these types of tank destroyers are quite interesting to draw, in the sense that they're in some ways quite easy, not the right word, some ways straightforward, in some ways not, and it's because of the fixed gun. So there's no turret, so your composition needs to be thought through differently. And I had this idea for a while now of doing a piece where the direction of the vehicle is moving uphill, but the actual position of the gun barrel is horizontal. And I felt this was a good piece, subject matter, to do that with. Plus, I hadn't drawn a Jagdpanzer 4 too many times, so that was quite interesting. Panzer 4s I've drawn quite a few times. It's actually got a very low profile, which is quite interesting, and it gives you an opportunity to have some fun artistically and be creative with the camo and the sort of wear and tear, or what modelers would call the weathering on the piece, which is artistically quite interesting, and it's an interesting, super interesting vehicle. Spent a lot of time getting the sort of muddy feel on the tracks and the wheels correct, which contrasts nicely, I felt, with the colour or the palette on the actual main chassis itself. I spent a lot of time doing that, but yeah, pleased with that, how that came out. It's an interesting tank destroyer, certainly from a visual point of view. Yeah, and again, just looking at just huge amounts of reference. I've got dozens and dozens of books and photographs, and watching black and white videos of these things, etc. So finally, this is a sort of work in progress of the piece that I'm working on at the minute, which is of a Churchill, but from the side perspective. I've done a Churchill from a sort of 3/4 perspective fairly recently. It was in at some point earlier this year. So I really wanted to do another perspective of one of these tanks. I've been lucky enough to when I was at the tank show a few years ago, actually talked to a gentleman who had served in a Churchill during the war, and it was a great conversation to hear his thoughts and experiences of actually being in this tank. I always try and, in all my work, understand the actual human element of these vehicles as much as possible. So that was very memorable, I would describe it as. And again, this is actually a screen, as I said, it's a screen grab. The actual high-res image that I'm working on at the minute, I've made some changes to that I'm not happy with, so I thought I'd just show a screen grab that I will probably revert back to. And to be honest with you, doing art is a lot of that. It's a lot of making mistakes, trying things and go, that doesn't work, and then you hit on something that does, and you're like, great, keep that. But in this particular piece, I want to do a lot of contrast again between the sort of the feeling of it being used, and mud and dirt and dust, and that contrast within that. So yeah, and it's again very interesting historical subject matter to draw and to understand and research into. I can't emphasize enough the importance of historical research when undertaking, I think, any creative endeavour around history. Probably spend some of these pieces. I mean, this piece I've probably spent through, something, a few hours here. I've probably spent 4 or 5 hours on this already, and it's got a long way to go. And I would probably spend more time actually doing historical research than painting. So it gives you some indication. But yeah, I just thought I'd finish on that piece just to show that work in progress. So hope that was interesting, and yeah, thanks for watching as ever.